just go ahead. All right. Coming out here, of course, is what I would mention is about most design in general is making the product understandable. A little bit about myself. Started out in visual design, print and branding, moved into web design, IA content strategy, also into site building and architecture, and user-centered design and advocacy is what a lot of what I do now. And of course, I'm active in supporting the Drupal community. I help organize the DC Drupal meetup, as well as coming out here and helping organize for GovCon and Drupal for Gov. As far as going out here and the value of architecting effective dashboards, it's more than the arrangements of widgets. It's giving a format and context to tell an effective data story. Oftentimes, we see a lot of different examples out here, especially when it's coming out here to sell major projects. Here, for example, is just a quick search on dribble.com. Of course, it's just basically as the site tags itself as show and tell for designers. As we can see here, there's a lot of information. Some of it is a compelling design, but most of the content here is plainly filler. When we go out here and start going out and adding actual content and having it tested in front of users, the experience may be different than the superficial presentation that we see here. In addition, I mean, coming up here, it's a lot of information showing up here on data displays, dark mode versus light mode. Dark mode can really sell a project, but if it's going to be most beneficial to your users is another thing entirely. Coming out and starting to work with interactive data. This is observable. I would say it's a pretty interesting site if you're interested for different types of data visualizations. All of what you see here is being built in D3.js. Mike Bostock, who created D3.js, is the curator of this. There can be some really compelling projects. Now, whether that's going to work for a lot of your visualizations may be another thing entirely, but it's a good place to go out here and start the discussion, at least to see different ways of presenting information, which may help uncover insights. As far as dashboards in the real world, coming from an aviation background, I think when it comes down to interfaces, a good starting point is to go out here and look at the evolution of cockpit displays. This is Douglas DC-6, back from the golden age of aviation. There's a lot of complex information. Of course, when it comes down to cognitive load, this can be a challenge, especially in difficult flight situations. And of course, at times, this can be an existential issue. At least with modern technology, and especially for digital and ties into what we do, modern cockpits have managed to condense a lot of this information, including automation. This is a modern cockpit. It's an Airbus A320. A lot of the critical information that we saw on the original display, even condensed down to here into somewhat in-between phase of analog displays, are coming out here to two main digital displays. That's one thing I think that we would look at considering when we're going out here and building our dashboards. As I showed before in some of the design mocks, it can be very interesting to go out here and sell this. It may work well to wow your clients and some of your end users, but when they need the information in a short amount of time, that's another issue entirely. Of course, for future trends, Tesla has been managing to push a lot of boundaries. I've had the opportunity to drive a Model 3 within the past year, and I would have to say some of the arguments, of course, when it comes down to touch interface may be a part of a challenge, but I was actually pretty surprised on the amount of information it displays, even in this minimal interface. It works pretty well for what it does. As far as the process is concerned, I look more into going out for a human-centered design project, coming out here based loosely on design thinking. The main thing I look to be out here is to go out here and making sure that you're including all users and stakeholders in the process. One of the challenges I would look into also is coming out here and looking at it as a series of questions. When it comes down to use context, as an executive, how might I find this information? As a manager, how might I find this information? And as a frontline team member, how might I access the information I need? All of these are three different contexts and roles. how we would define this and approach our jobs and the challenges for the data we're displaying can present entirely different contexts and usages. One of the things about it is on a project I was on within the past 2 years, is coming out here even when there's not much time to go out here and do a lot of exhaustive user research and testing, is to come out here and build proto-personas based upon the use types that you have, finding out for the goals that they're looking for, also for frustrations and challenges. For example, on some other projects I've been on, there was even a desire for some executives to go very high level at that point, oftentimes have their data being accessed on, say, a tablet or mobile device. In addition to it, more and more information for data display is even coming out here when it comes down to where the rubber really hits the road. Say a lot of staff may be coming out here and accessing this on mobile devices, say when it comes down to inventory management, or even when it comes down to door-to-door shipping, especially during the lockdown for COVID. This becomes very important, especially when it comes down to deliveries that need to be managed across multiple systems, such as, say, FedEx and UPS use. One of the best tools that I've actually had for working on this and breaking down the barriers to including all stakeholders is coming out here and whiteboarding. Coming out here, for example, like this, tabular displays are still a major part of a lot of data dashboards and displays I've had to work on. And for that reason, I find it to be a nearly bulletproof method for involving the stakeholders. Here, for example, like this, even people who may not consider themselves very design-centric or data-centric, enables them to help about that. What I generally try to do is talk people into scenarios. The good thing about that is that ties into the more visual elements as well. One of the best tools of working with this and what I talk about is basically aligning the user needs with effective visualization types. Here, for example, there are a number of different types of data displays, charting types that have put down into a basic format. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is when this challenge can actually come out is looking at the cardinal display types. Into that part of an issue is there are also different cognitive issues that come about for that. That's one reason why I would suggest, that's when it comes down to wireframing and mocking, which I will get into shortly, is coming out here and looking at the simplest solution to the problem, then working at building up. There also can be cognitive issues with some certain chart types, and that would be one thing to check out. And the only way I can honestly say when it comes out here is by wireframing and prototyping. Oftentimes, that's only where these particular issues will be uncovered for your use case. Again, coming up here, these may be some very interesting displays showing out here for raw graphing techniques. The issue behind this is of course, is sometimes these, besides being novel and interesting, can be more decorative than they are going to be informative. Jackie Schrag, she's a local data visualization expert, comes down to is those that aren't data driven. Part of the challenge also is what type of data our clients may ask us to display. Coming out, and I'll show you with some of the product examples I have coming after this. Of course, we see this oftentimes now when it comes down to marketing and key performance indicators. As I'm showing here, for example, these are out in airports. One of these on the left-hand side is in Keflavik. The other is in Frankfurt. Of course, this comes down to net performance scales. I'm sure that we often are coming out here and say when we're online, or even, for example, in public locations like this, are coming out of it maybe as simple as this, or say on a scale from 1 to 9, how likely would you be to recommend Adobe Illustrator to a client or friend? Now, whether this helps all in marketing is another issue entirely, but it's been a major part of some of the projects I've been on. That comes up here, for example, like this, and how it's tied into user sentiment. This here, for an example like this, is coming out here for a project I had also been on. This is showing out here on the left-hand side of coming out here for sentiments. This is showing multiple comparisons in a card type display through a number of the mocks I had been working on. This is another example of coming out here from multiple choice questions on surveys. Part of the design goal with this in mind was coming out here and being able to show multiple comparisons. One of the challenges also here is coming out here and having unbiased information. And for that reason, we're looking on this project about coming out here and having just focusing on the clarity of information. Seeing, of course, is taking as much of the distractions away as possible. As far as dark patterns in data, there are some challenges to look at. This is one of the most famous examples. Shortly after the introduction of the iPhone, Steve Jobs, of course, is very big on marketing. This is from one of the major keynote presentations that was given here, and we're showing about the uptake in the market. This is a pie chart. In addition to some of the challenges that a pie chart may generally have, such as a human cognition issues with coming out here and comparing relative sizes in the pie chart versus a bar graph. Part of the issues here with this is the perspective of the chart was skewed. That already is starting to show some of the information and in a misleading format. Again here, the 19.5, which should be covering the Apple information, is shown larger than the 21.2. Edward Tufte refers to this pattern as chart junk. That's one thing that we may run into with challenges, especially with some client demands. I would generally tend to skew towards clarity. That's where it comes out to what is termed as a misleading graph. And the problem, of course, with this is it can be a misuse of statistics, and it can derive an incorrect conclusion. Sometimes we may come into these issues depending upon a visualization type inadvertently, and it's good to be aware of these challenges. As far as audience and usage context, that's also another key consideration when coming out here and designing visualizations. Take for an example, when a challenge is rather data intensive. This may come down as in this image we're showing, say, for scientific and financial information. Oftentimes, a lot of this is going to be data driven, coming out here, tabular displays. There will be a lot of analysis. It would be rare, for example, for someone in this use context to be accessing this information via a mobile device. Normally, it's going to be on a multi-screen display. Even on some projects I've been on that had to do with a lot of financial information, say like when it came down to mortgage and other types of real estate transactions, there may even be a triple screen setup. That, of course, is going to have its own types of particular challenges. And I would say the best thing to do is, unless security information and confidentiality is going to be an issue, to work directly with end users in their environment to see what challenges they're facing. Again, coming out to this in some of the context I had covered earlier, even when it comes down to some modern technology, say, for example, if there's going to be field research or field work, it may only be a mobile or handheld device such as a tablet, which is going to be used to access the information, sometimes even to enter the information or interact with the dashboard. That requires its own type of analysis to come out here and to consider the use cases. As far as refinement and process and measurement, interface metrics I found have been hard to determine via analytics. I know oftentimes, especially for working on teams I've been on that have been international, maybe separated by 9 to 12-hour time differences, there's a good tendency to go out here and draw on a lot of open source tools like Google Analytics, sometimes even custom analytics tools. I found that to be hard because, take for an example, as it is on general web design and KPI indicators there, key performance indicators, part of the challenge there is going to be looking at is to find out, say, for example, if there's a drop-off or if there's a reason that, say, users are not following a particular path or funnel that you may have considered. Of course, that may come down to design of your dashboard and data visualizations as well. And that's where I come down to that. If you really want to understand the sticking points, you need to observe users in their task environment. That's part of the reason I chose this image here, where this information is being presented. I've worked on projects in the past that had a very challenging design, for example, And to get around the interface challenges that some of the users and sometimes even in company were facing, they would have a bunch of Post-it notes attached to their screen to show them how to get around some of the challenges, and especially when it came down to lack of information and clarity, when it came down to the organization and hierarchy. That may be something you're facing, and you'll never know this just by going through analytics. That's one thing, of course, is I would cover again and emphasize. If your users are needing to find workarounds, is there a type of anti-pattern that you may have to go out here and discover and work through with? As far as iteration and ideation, besides what I had mentioned in the past with coming out and whiteboarding, one project I was on, this is just coming out here for low fidelity wireframes, and coming out here for looking at style patterns. One of the things I would mention about this is something, of course, coming out here with some notional information. One of the things I would not advise, though, coming out at this point, which was a very early stage, is making sure that it's going to be working, that your layouts are going to be including live data as quickly as possible. As you can see here is just a general layout, just some sort of filler information coming in here. That may help to go out here and have a general path to go on. Again, coming out here, though, for uncovering true data challenges. Without having actual user information coming in, it's going to be difficult to determine how it's going to work in the real world. That's why I would also suggest having something that's as throwaway as possible. That's what I have over on the right-hand side, is just showing quick UI elements that I have that I can put together on a project to throw something up that's fairly easy to assemble, and also to come out here and modify as time goes on. Also, when it comes out here for UI patterns, this was an earlier project I had worked upon. Just coming up here and showing how different types of data can be displayed, looking at different mapping elements, also showing up here if your system allows for it, and depending on your budget that you have available for time and resources, even coming up here and having pop-up displays that show more information and allowing drawdowns that are in more detail. That's one thing I would suggest on most projects, is coming out here and giving users a high-level view, but allowing them to drill down if they need to. Here is just an example, and also coming out here for iteration. Coming out here, as you can see, is coming up with more detailed information as time goes on. One of the things on this project we were also looking into achieving is, if users needed to access the data and download, that would be easily possible, that they could go out here and do their own data manipulations and visualizations on their own time and format. Depending on security environments, I know that that's often not an issue, and sometimes due to confidentiality may not be allowed on a lot of projects. As far as interface considerations, this was another exploration and visualization on a recent project I was on. Dark mode, of course, has often been, it's been a big draw. I've seen projects sold, for example, that, as I had shown in some of the earlier examples, didn't really share a lot of the information. As you can see here, part of the wireframe information I had on the last, on that last one of these demos is taken a step further here. Coming up to this, just showing on the type of information that's coming up. Of course, a lot of the information is still tabular. One of the things, as I have mentioned, and what I tend to do in most of my design and usability projects, is making sure the information is as clear and straightforward as possible. That comes up here to navigation and wayfinding, coming out into the chart information, trying to go out here and display things in the most high-level view possible. But users can come out here and find more information, but not in a way that clutters the interface and can actually make it confusing and difficult to find. A few of the challenges to consider if you're looking into doing light mode versus dark mode, or say if your stakeholders are asking about it, is generally light mode tends to lead to better performance most of the time, and still looking for a contrast ratio of 7:1. I'd add to that a little bit. One thing I found is when I go out here and I make accessibility a core requirement of all of the projects where I'm able to go put this input in. Generally to this, if you're going out here and looking at high contrast text, and especially when it comes down to dark mode, here, for example, even in my in this slide demonstration, yes, I'm using technically dark mode. The thing is, I'm using larger text. Oftentimes, if you have data-rich, data-dense displays, and I would even say on some websites, which I find to be an issue of being accessed via mobile devices, even younger people that have good eyesight may have an issue reading some of the smaller text displays. That may include going out here and changing the type size, and especially when it comes down to line height or coming out to here to traditional type design of leading. That may make some major changes onto your layouts, and that would be another thing to consider when coming out here and having to account for dark mode. As far as data visualization in Drupal, there are a few open source projects. Unfortunately, D3, that was a project that was fairly well developed in Drupal 7, is no longer available. That has stopped being developed. Although there is a local developer coming out here, there is the charts module. That allows for a lot of integration for coming out here with some common libraries such as Google Charts or High Charts. There's also a possibility through its API to go out here and include other graphing modules or even custom graphs. On the style guide to my website even, I have a few custom D3 visualizations at this point that I've built into my style guide. One of the things I want to do is do some demos up in a future point, especially when it comes down to data visualization, is integrating this with views. That's possible, takes a little bit of a setup, but the good thing about it is using some third-party graphing libraries such as D3. It has a bit of a learning curve to start out with. One of the good things behind it is, though, is it allows easy access to the data. So I'm just looking about coming out here and uncovering this through views, just to show as a proof of concept and a demo of how that can be used on future projects. And again, when it comes down to data visualization and design in general, it's good to design for the novice, but allow for the expert. And to quote Dieter Rams again, good design is as little as possible. I would say the main thing I would look into when working on projects such as this is to focus on the clarity of the data and allow people to access this and basically help the cognition and understanding and uptake as easily as possible. As far as some suggested resources, a good thing about coming out here is having some data visualization checklists, style guides. Some of the earlier sites I'd gone ahead and discussed. And for those of you that are here in the Washington, D.C. area, there's some meetups that meet regularly, such as the DC Data Viz meetup. The good thing about some of the sources like this is there's an active community. There's a lot of information that may go out here and say different case studies and projects that may spur some of the inspiration about coming out here and helping you with your projects. And thanks again for allowing me to present today at GovCon. Are there any questions?
I don't know if there were any questions in the chat, but yeah, if there are any questions now, please post them.
Do you mind sharing your slides?
Yes, I can go ahead and I can post them up. I'll go ahead and put that onto GovCon.
Thank you.
Yeah, he'll upload that in the individual session page. There's one, are these graphs built in Drupal?
The graph demos that I have right now, most of them actually are put together as demo mocks inside Figma. What I can do is I can also post a link to my website, because what I did is, say, for example, on my site, which is completely run in Drupal 8, that was rebuilt from the ground up after D7. Inside my style guide, what I've done is I've gone up here and I have a few base graphs right now in the style guide that were built on D3. And that style guide is built on top of KSS Node. That basically is set up within the theme of Drupal 8. What I want to do is at least have a few proof of concepts posted up to come out here and show how, for example, D3.js can be used in Drupal. I know it's been done before. There have been other demonstrations, and I want to show that it's possible.
Here's another great question. This person says, I'm colorblind and have difficulty with visualizations that rely solely on color. How do you suggest addressing this issue?
Well, a good thing, yeah, that's a good question, as a matter of fact. On some of the projects I've been working on that I had shown some of the demos from, most of those were custom SaaS projects. That was something that was, of course, talked about and being addressed. The good thing about it is some of the open source graphing libraries like D3 do allow for a great deal of accessibility challenges to be addressed. Part of the thing that we talked about too, and of course, some of the projects I'd been on, say when it came down to survey, when it came down to say employee survey and customer satisfaction survey, some of their clients were Fortune 500 customers who were demanding a lot of accessibility because of course, as there's a good segment of the population, including some of the staff in these organizations that needed to have that accessible. What would happen is we were working on some high contrast modes. At the time that my work on the project, my consultation on the project ended, those hadn't been implemented yet. Accessibility can be built into some of the graphing libraries like D3, and I recommend, just as I do, for example, for standard HTML and CSS, to be a standard core requirement for coming out here and making any content that's posted on a site accessible.
Yeah, that's good explanation. Okay, any other questions?
All right, well, thank you, and hope you have a good rest of the day for Drupal GovCon.
Thanks so much, Carl.
Absolutely.